Welcome to the Law Firm Growth Podcast, where we share the latest tips, tactics, and strategies for scaling your practice from the top experts in the world of growing law firms. Are you ready to take your practice to the next level? Let's get started.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Law Firm Growth Podcast. I'm your host as always, Jan Roos, and I'm here with a very exciting episode and guest in John Strohmeyer. So I don't know how I didn't find John earlier, but I heard him on another friend's podcast, Molly McGrath's, and I loved what he had to say. Discovered he had his own podcast, and it's about a subject that I think more people have to pay attention to, which is customer service in law firms. So John runs his own firm out of Houston, but to give a little teaser in his background, he did used to work at the Four Seasons for, I believe, 4 years. For people who don't know, they've got some decent customer service over there. So it's been really, really fascinating to dive into his world. And I'm super excited to have him on the podcast. So John, thank you so much for taking the time to show here.
Of course, Jan. It's great to be here. I'm surprised we didn't run across each other earlier as well.
Okay, awesome. So I kind of teased the background a little bit, and I think we might need to go into that later, but I wanted to kind of start off with a question. And the question that I had was, it kind of seems to me that everyone pays a face value taking advantage of customer service. I feel like customer focused is something that you'll see on almost every law firm website. But as you and I both know, that doesn't seem to be the case. So why don't you think people are able to put good customer service policy in place if they know how important it is?
That's such a good question. I'm trying to organize all my thoughts. We're going to start with everybody knows it when they see it, but they can't describe what's happening. And this is the big thing to think about. If you're listening to this podcast, you're probably a lawyer or some sort of related professional. You have been to places that do service well, whether it's a high-end restaurant, Four Seasons like I worked at, or even Disney. You've gone and you've experienced it. So you know what it feels like, but you don't know how to get there. It's almost like you're the critic of the restaurant. You don't care how they actually made the food. You're just tasting the results. So we're now asking you as the client service provider, as the lawyer, okay, you're in charge. Go deliver client service. Well, you've never been trained in it. You don't know what that actually means. And when I go back and I think about, all right, when I was at the Four Seasons, I was night manager there for 3 years. That meant I showed up at 11 o'clock at night. I left at 8 or 9 in the morning, and everything was on my plate. What did service mean there? Well, it meant taking care of people, doing what needed to be done to uphold our standards, and making sure nobody, if there was a problem, we resolved it. It's really simple to say all of that. But when we come back and try and implement that in a law firm, what does that even mean? And where are we focusing? And so what this leads to is saying empty things like we're client focused. I shared something on Twitter earlier this week. It was like the 10 things you should never put in your pitch deck or your website. And I'll make sure to get you a link to that. But everybody's client focused. Just saying it, it's like, oh, well, we breathe air and we, we convert
Exactly.
we convert glucose into energy. Well, that's wonderful. But how are you doing it, and how is it actually helping your clients? And I'll, one last little screed before I let you talk, John. What it isn't is handing over a bunch of useless stuff to your clients. The Four Seasons isn't the Four Seasons because of high thread count sheets, or because there's marble floors, or any of the other physical stuff at the Four Seasons. It's all about how they're taking care of you. And that's important in the context of a hotel, but a law firm is not a hotel, and we've got to keep that in mind. People are going to hotels and Disney and high-end restaurants for very different reasons than they're coming to law firms. And so if we start pulling out, oh, well, they gave me this, or they gave me that, shock and awe and surprises, you're going to waste your time and effort going down the wrong paths, and you're not going to improve service.
Right. It's actually kind of interesting. I didn't realize this until you said it just now, but it's kind of one of these naive expertise kind of fields. Like another thing that we see all the time more on the marketing side is people who are like, oh yeah, like I'm really an expert on branding. It's like, okay, cool. I think you could probably pick a good logo out of a lineup, but those same people couldn't tell you anything about kerning or color palettes or any of that stuff. And honestly, I don't know anything about branding, so I'll stop right there. But basically, it's one of those things too, because it's you can think you have the understanding of it, but much like the food critic, that doesn't mean that you could make yourself a souffle unless you were taught before. So it's almost like we have this kind of underlying technique that people can see the results of, but really don't have any idea from the inside. And then to your point, it can probably get pretty expensive to do these shock and awe packages, or maybe even worse, think yourself, oh yeah, cool, I got I give people pens in the San Pellegrino. Like, this I'm 5 stars, baby. Let's go.
I know. And that's the thing. You can do that, but think about this. What's the gifting policy at Disney? I mean, it's basically nothing. They don't give you much of anything that isn't cheap or easy to produce. You're paying for everything. And the people are happy to do it. Like, Disney charges a lot of money for very good reason. They provide excellent experience. And that's the thing. People are going to Disney and Four Seasons and restaurants and day spas, things like that, for some combination of entertainment, pampering, and fun. And that is perfectly fine. Nobody's going to confuse those entertainment, pampering, and fun experiences with why they're coming to a lawyer. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't mean we should be gruff or mean, and it doesn't mean we shouldn't have a good experience. But it does mean, how are you helping clients by having the San Pellegrino and, the Mont Blanc pens just for the signing, or even the high-end, fancy bond paper for documents? I mean, once I went on my own and opened my firm, one of the first things I stopped doing was using fancy bond paper to sign documents. Why? Nobody cares. It doesn't make the will any more or less valid. There's an argument that, well, we know this is the original. Okay, we can also just make sure that we know this one's the original in a way that's a little easier than that. But it doesn't mean that we have to go around and really spend a bunch of time and effort on things that don't help the client move the needle.
Okay, gotcha. And one thing I want to really drill down on there is that, it seems like the orientation on whether something that you're doing is effective or not is it moving the needle for the client, right? And to your point, it's obviously going to be different in a law firm than in, something like Disneyland. But I guess for somebody who's coming into this completely blind, or maybe they have something that they've been doing not super intentionally, how do you go about taking that position and what the customer experience is like? And is there any sort of starting point for people to really kind of start building these blocks that are going to actually make a difference in their practice?
Yeah. I mean, the first thing we have to do is define what that needle is that we're moving. And you've got to figure out, well, the client is coming to you as the lawyer to get to some mountaintop. What are you going to do to guide them? And so we want to think about that in the terms of, how are we helping them? Nominally, and a lot of lawyers reduce what we do to document production. And that's not really it. In the context of a personal injury attorney, sure, they want some money as compensation for their injuries, but really, they're trying to get their clients back to being as whole as possible, before the injury. And when you take it in that light, it does open up these new possibilities of, well, how are you actually taking care of the clients? Does it make sense for you to send gifts to the client? While I generally say no, I remember interacting with a lawyer, I think it was on a Facebook group a couple months ago. Her clients are personal injury clients. She gets them generally before they've gone through surgery. So she has a care package she sends after they've had surgery. That, I think, is brilliant. Why? She's focused on where her clients are. Yes, she's spending money on clients, but it's not, she's sending soup and flowers and magazines. It's not this overwhelming display. It's not, the customized branded merch. It's not, the $700 steak knives. It's something that helps the clients right then to recognize, look, we're here to help you recover. This is a small thing. We've focused on you. And it doesn't mean that we're doing, San Pellegrino in the office plus any other drink type that you may have thought of once.
So it kind of seems like thoughtfulness is sort of like the leverage here, right? So it's like you don't need to spend a lot or do a tremendous amount if it really fits in the customer journey.
Exactly. So much of service is simple things. It's rarely some over-the-top spend. It's all about, another way to think about it is, it's the adjectives on how you're delivering. So, it's fast or it's easy. They've remembered what we've done. It's painless, pain-free. The more you can make it easy for your clients, that's what we're thinking about. So just in the context of, we're looking at moving the needle for some client. Does it make sense to have San Pellegrino in the office? Clients don't really care. My clients, many of them have tens of millions of dollars. They've been to my offices. They are not super fancy, but they are clean and modern. We don't have a custom stocked fridge with, finest bottled waters of the world. Clients aren't looking for that. They're usually there for half an hour or so, and then they're gone. And they're fine with that. When I start seeing more of a difference on that, or if anybody even mentions it, we'll look into it. But it's really looking, where are my clients and what do they care about?
So we've talked about moving the needle. I want to ask you a super, super tactical question. Do you guys have any sort of specific metrics that you recommend for your firm as an example, or for somebody going through this process to start really measuring whether these things work? And I've heard of stuff getting thrown out there like Net Promoter Score. I'm sure you have an opinion on that I'd love to hear about. But how do we kind of determine the success or failure of these sort of initiatives?
So this is something where I don't track Net Promoter Score. I do track Google reviews, but a lot of it is, it's going back and it's the thing you've heard time and time again. If you do the basics, if you just focus on the process, you're going to get the results you're looking for. So coming back to what we did at the Four Seasons, what were we tracking? Sure, we tracked reviews and comment cards and what did people say. But we were more focused on our own internal process. We had standards for how you answer the phone, how you interact with guests. Thinking back to when I checked in a guest, there were 21 or 23 things I had to do every time somebody checked into the hotel. Now, most of these things get kind of blended together. When you're talking about the hotel, I'm supposed to tell them everywhere they can get something to eat right now in the hotel, because we're thinking through, all right, the person is coming into the hotel. They've just been traveling from somewhere. That's why they're staying in a hotel. They're probably hungry. And it made it a seamless process of, if you're hitting all of these things every time, they're designed in such a way that we're doing our job. So it became more of are we responding in a way that does our job? And does everybody know what the standard behavior is? So thinking about phone calls at the hotel, answering phone calls within 3 rings. Why? Just shows you're paying attention. Hold times, never more than 15 seconds. Why? People don't like being on hold. So if you're going to have to put somebody on hold, it's let me quickly finish this thing, or tell them, can I call you back? And then you call them back. So much of it is those simple things. If you do it right, it wasn't this over the top, make sure your standard is gold-plated pens. It's make sure you call the person back when you said you were going to call them back.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting because, we're potentially uncovering a pretty juicy vein of conversation here, because it seems like in order to have a good client service, and I want to get to this in a little bit too, about the definition of customer service versus experience. We were talking about a little bit on the pre-recording. But, it seems like you have to have good process in place, right? So, it's almost impossible to do this if you're not a company that has good SOPs.
Absolutely. And the more you do that, the more you can systematize it. It just makes it easier not only to have your people now know what they're doing, but bring in new people. Later today, we've got a new law student starting, and her job today is just literally follow my operations guy around. She's not responsible for producing anything. She just needs to see this is how things get done. So she'll see a few signings. She'll probably watch Brad work in Typeform and Zapier and Basecamp for a while just to see this is how everything gets done. And that's the point. Like, see where things are. And then starting next week, we'll start getting her in on some of the training projects. Like, here are the things that the new associate thought were actually very useful when she was an intern to get her up to speed. So setting out even the training so that it's not just well, look, we're going to dump a bunch of work on you and you'll pick it up that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And you said something really exciting. And this is another question I had. You said you have an operations guy. And just for some context on how what kind of stage the firm's at right now, how many employees do you guys have total?
We are 7 total employees, including me.
Okay, awesome. And at what point, like, I guess for somebody who might be kind of like a little bit earlier in the path, like, at what stage does one hire an operations guy?
I probably waited longer than I should have. I think probably the first and best hire was getting Smith AI to answer phone calls for me. So it wasn't a true hire, but that was one of the best outsourcings just because they answered phone calls. And so I didn't have to.
Right.
From there, this wasn't necessarily a wrong answer. So I don't want anybody to think that I'm saying that. But what I look for now, my first real hire was my paralegal. But having the person, the operations guy who's there to almost help me find the lowest level tasks instead of having the paralegal who's taking the tasks that are just below my level.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I think about is like, you're always looking to pick up the easiest wins. Let's not swing for the fences. I'd rather have singles and doubles all day, do the 1% improvement, because if we rack those up, we're going to get better a lot faster. And then it makes the bigger developments so much easier because we've got all these other little things in place.
Yeah. And like those, 10 or 20% improvements on the day to day can end up having so much more investment into stuff that might end up being a little bit more productive for you as the owner of the firm or, someone else coming in online. But it's really interesting because it's kind of funny timing as well. We're in the middle of a big process overhaul for a couple departments here at Caseflow right now. One of the things I've been thinking about a lot is, there's kind of these levels of people that we've kind of seen, at least just in our experience in hiring over the years too. It's like there's people who get process to the point of being able to follow it. Again, the lowest bar is people who can't follow a darn process and they don't really last too long here. The second time is people who can understand the process and follow it. And then the last part would be people who understand process to the point of being able to write process and edit process and see, kind of take like a big picture look at the organization. And this is kind of one of the dilemmas that I've faced personally, is that I've kind of classically been that person. And this is something that I've heard is like a pretty, common challenge with organizations of all types and all sizes. But it's awesome that you have somebody who's been able to do it, because as that being an early hire, which it sounds like it was, you're able to really get those returns like pretty quickly, right? And like, what kind of stuff does that free up for you to do on the day to day?
It's really helpful because there are so many things that I could do, and I could find myself going down the rabbit hole on things that, oh, wouldn't this be fun? Or let me go tinker in Zapier and see if I can't make this work, when really my best use isn't there. Mm. So just having the ability to say, we have all of our processes stored in Basecamp, in the HQ matter there. We've set up an email address so that we can, if anything comes up, and I can just like shoot it over into that matter through Zapier. And it's like, here, let's remember how to do it this way. It also creates a task just so we're not forgetting some of those little bits of knowledge that show up in an email or something like that. But then you're right, the having people who can write the process. One of the guys on my team, my internal bookkeeper, Bill, he follows those instructions sometimes more than I'd like, because I look at things. So he'll be working in this Excel spreadsheet that I developed for myself just to make sure that IOLTA is always balanced. Mm-hmm. And so every week he's going in there reconciling it. And when I first handed it over, I thought I had my directions down. Like there was 2 or 3 pages. It was like 40 steps. Download this report, download that report. And it took a while to get Bill up to speed on it because I'd written it in my language. And what I've learned is Bill is so good at just kind of following the instructions exactly as they are written, sometimes to my supreme frustration when I'm like, Bill, I know it said cell 56. It was cell 57. Could you have not just looked one cell over? But that's also the point of he's really good at picking that out because he's going to follow it and he's going to do it and say, I don't understand. And so we'll run out all of the edge cases on this. And I also know if I'm going to go in there and fiddle with the Excel file, either tell him I've done things and he needs to update the instructions or constrain whatever I'm doing so that it doesn't upset any of the cell values that he's looking for.
Yeah. And it's actually, you bring up a really good point too, because this is something I've also been thinking about a lot. But like one of the super key things is that if you have a bill and they have the confidence and you set the culture in such a way that they can ask the questions, then you almost have a self-correcting procedure. Some of the worst situations I can think about in the last couple of years for stuff that we've set up as far as SOPs been from people who don't do that. And then you realize when the smoke starts coming up over the horizon, you're like, oh my God, how long?
What are we going to do?
How long has this been in the mix? But yeah, no, it's also good too, because, to kind of see the real side of SOPs too. And this is just something not to go on too much of a grandstand, but I think a lot of times people pitch the 101 level dream of a lot of these things, be it marketing, be it operations, be it like whatever. And then they don't realize that, to really have something that's kind of a sustainable advantage of this sometimes takes a little bit more than setting it up. But when you have the point that like, it's actually something that's been built, then that's really how things become kind of sustainable as a competitive advantage, whatever that happens to be. But yeah, I kind of want to transition a little bit too, and kind of like the benefits of customer service too. And just, having looked at your podcast, I know there's a lot of stuff that you talk about in terms of the crossovers and using service as marketing. So can you kind of bring us in on how you've seen that work in either your firm or people that that have been working with you?
It makes it so much easier because this is what we do, not looking at it right now, but the reviews that we get, it all comes back to, listening to other people talk about, what works for Google reviews. The fact that the service is all about how we're doing this, how we're delivering it. How do we make it easy? Well, we know we need to get reviews. We know that Google rewards kind of wordier, longer reviews. So let's make it easy for everybody. We use Text Expander a lot. Just having that text expander with the link built in with, here are the questions we want you to answer so people don't just hit 5 stars and bounce or just say something like everything was really good. If we can get them to think about 1 or 2 of those questions, it's making it easy for them when it's still kind of an awkward position to, like people don't like necessarily leaving reviews for high-end services. It would be great if everybody just naturally did it and the only thing they were thinking about is, how can I leave a review as soon as possible? The reality is they're busy. They've got other things to do. So when it's time to leave the review, we're here to make it as easy as possible for them. And that's what it comes down to, is thinking through, whether it's leaving a review or sending the email to the client, like, how are you going to make it easy for this process for them? What questions are they going to have? How can you just kind of grease the skids so you get what you need done as fast as possible?
Yeah. And also this is something that I've always had a really, really hard time with both myself and getting our employees to actually go ahead and ask for reviews too, because it is kind of an awkward thing, right? We're talking about high-end trust here, that's going to be a pretty penny in most instances. And then after they've, written you a check, I'll go, could you do me a solid, brother?
Right.
It's kind of a hard ask to make, but getting super tactical, how do you think about that? And like, what point in the process do you think have you guys gotten the best results from introducing it?
So far, we've been doing it at the end of the process. Just kind of let's get all the way to the end. Sometimes we'll ask early on if it makes sense. And the other thing that we do is if we've got people who call us, the marketing we do generates a lot of leads, many of which are people who are not marketing qualified. So these are people who think, they say, oh, John's talking about tax or estate planning. Let me call him with my question about, I want to challenge this will. So I send out, I think like 20% of our leads, we end up referring out to litigators just because we're generating these leads. we're doing a handoff to people. We're making sure they know, look, you called the wrong place. We're not just going to say, go somewhere else. It's here. We're going to get some details about your particular case, and we're going to send it to one of the 6 litigators we know, just because they're different. They've got different focuses. Some are better with kind of corporate structures intertwined with that. Some are just better pure fiduciaries. Some need some guardianship involved. There are a lot of things to think about. And so we want to say, well, look, even though we're not the right people, we're going to get you to the right people so that you get taken care of, because that's ultimately the goal. You want to get taken care of. And that's part of my marketing, is making sure I'm sending those referrals out. I have zero interest in taking on probate litigation as a practice area. But if I send out all of these referrals to the people who are sending work back to me, like, that helps me.
Yeah. Well, I want to point out a couple of things for the listeners too that I think are super, super important. And, if you guys have been listening to the talk that we've been having about process, one of the major reasons that I'm constantly railing against running a general practice and niching down as much as is realistic possible is because it allows the process to be a little bit more simple at the end of the day. And the second thing, and I think this is the first time I've ever heard somebody talk about this on the podcast, I feel like the way that most attorneys do referrals is they can be doing so much more. Because the first thing is that when somebody thinks about your law firm, they're like, well, I was taken care of regardless of the fact that I didn't have something that they could, invoice me for. That's one thing. And the second thing is, to the referral partner, you're giving them so much more detail about the incoming lead. It's not just, oh, so-and-so has a litigation need. Here you go.
Right.
But, you're giving them the dossier, so to speak. And I'm sure you guys are doing some thoughtful introductions from that point forward. But, how much more attractive does that make you as a referral partner?
Exactly. And if anything, I kind of treat the money I don't spend on other advertising and marketing sources, it's really just reinvested here of, if I take care of the people around me, it's going to work for me. And yeah, we had somebody call up. They had filed a probate thing here in Texas by themselves. Now they needed to change. I looked at it and just said, with everything going on, this may end up in some litigation based on what they told us. That mere chance, it's better to get them in the hands of a litigator who can help get them their first thought, as well as be able to see down the road and see, look, if there is litigation coming, they're going to be much better suited. I'm not going to have to bring in this litigator later.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, it just makes it easier for you to grow the firm and that kind of thing too, because you're just focusing on what's good for you, right?
Exactly. And I mean, just the niching down also makes it so much easier. I mean, here I am. I'm almost 3.5 years in on this firm. I haven't even niched down since I opened, when I was not only doing the same stuff, but I've taken certain pages off the website just to stop taking that work and focus more on other things, not even other things, the things that are working best for me. And it's great. If it's not something that's within what we do, it's very easy to say, even to a current client, I'm not the guy to do this. We've got somebody else. So it's not even I'm not making money off of this. It's, you're going to get a much better result by going to somebody else.
Yeah. Big picture frame, that's the best interest of the client at the end of the day. Right. And I'm sure that comes across in everything that you're saying. I also say this too, for people that are worried about this, and this might be kind of a pseudo, this is one of those intersection of psychology and woo woo stuff. It's I really believe that the more you say no to no, this is not a fit to people, the more conviction you have when you tell somebody, yeah, I think this is a good call for you.
Absolutely. We see this all the time. Somebody's asking about certain tax planning things. They were asking about it in a way that sometimes we say no to it, but also I could see where they were going. It makes it much easier for me to know this is a good fit versus this is a bad fit.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And then the other thing too, just it's going to be so much better from a marketing perspective too, especially, and this is the thing, John, we've covered so many different things. I just want people to understand how all this stuff fits together. Going back to the review strategy, if it's 75 reviews that are 5-star about a specific issue versus 75 reviews when one's family and one's a car accident case and one's a simple will, the person that really is that 10 out of 10 fit for the client is going to be so much you're going to have so much, you're never going to get price shopped for that. If you're the only guy who does this for this type of person, then it's, the amount of power that you have in the consultation is tremendous. And that ultimately conversion rate is really the leverage that you're going to get on your spend at the end of the day.
Right. It's the way I think about it is two different ways of putting it, but I'll start with this. Like, why should anybody pick up the phone and call you? You want to make sure that people know exactly when to call you and when not to call you. Sure, mistakes will happen, but it also makes it easy for your referral sources if they know exactly why they call you. My referral sources know, don't call me with any litigation. Thank you very much for thinking of me. I don't know how to do it, and I don't want to learn how to do it. And the other thing is something that I've been saying for a while, and it's you don't have job security until people pick up the phone and call you to pay you money to do something. And, it made some sense, but it really is, you need people to call you and know why they're calling you. That's what we want to get to, is make it as easy as possible for them to know when and how to pick up the phone to make sure that you get some money.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So I guess we're getting towards the end of the hour. And I wanted to kind of leave with super tactical stuff. As far as people who are really starting to consider it, are there any first steps that you can think that somebody could take to get the foundation in place to start really thinking about their customer journey and the customer service experience of working with their firm?
Yes. And it's something I've mentioned before, but it's worth going back to. You've got to start by defining that needle that you're moving. Again, in the context of PI, it's not just get money for the client because, well, you're a lawyer. And so think about how is it that you're helping the client recover? As an estate planner, my job is not to produce a pile of documents. The client isn't going to care if I give them a will or a trust or a singing bush that just tells people what to do when they're dead. They want to make sure at the end of the day, their plan gets carried out and come up with what that looks like and know, look, we help these sorts of people affect these sorts of plans. It's not just we produce documents, because if all you do is produce documents, you're competing with LegalZoom and the free forms on the internet. And you're going to run into a lot of bigger problems keeping your firm alive. And then once you've got what that needle is, it makes it so much easier. Everything just kind of flows downstream from there because you can start figuring out, all right, well, if we're going to do this, how do we make it better and easier, not only for our clients, but for you, the owner, as well as your staff? How do we make it easier for them? You've got finite resources. You're going to have to make some choices. And by knowing what your needle is and what you're looking for, it'll help you figure out what are the best strategies and tactics to build out your firm. But you can't start picking appropriate strategies and tactics until you know what you're trying to do.
Yeah. And that's awesome. I mean, I think this has been a huge, honest to God, like really big eye-opening conversation for me. I'm saying that super genuinely, John, because I thought,
thank you.
Like, at some level, I might have thought that there was some kind of like, step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for this stuff. But it sounds like, it really is kind of one of those situations where you have to be deliberate about when you're setting your goal. But the way that you get there really is going to be unique for every service and every type of person. So, there's not a prescriptive path for that, so to speak.
No. And, and it's the good news and the bad news. Everybody's going to have to figure out what it looks like for them. But there is so much space, yes. LegalZoom is coming to eat all of the easy legal work. Jeff Bezos is investing in, Pilot, the automated accounting firm. The low-level work is going away, but look around you. Four Seasons is still out there. People are still willing to pay for high-end quality services, even with non-accountant ownership of CPA firms. You still have plenty of folks who are making a living out there. I mean, more than just making a living, the folks who run their own firms, who have their medium-sized CPA firms, this is not doom and gloom. You've got to just figure out how it works for you and your people. Obviously, my dog has a lot of thoughts on this too.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. And then, I think this is a great place to kind of set people off for the next step. And then, I've been a huge fan of your podcast recently, John, but for everyone else, what's the best way to get in touch?
Best things to do. One, episode 65, it's just going to be titled Update. it's going to really consolidate a lot of what I've figured out going through the podcast over the last year. So if any of this resonates with you, start with that episode 65. Beyond that, if you want to get in touch, John at StrohmeyerLaw.com. Or also reach out. I'm John the Lawyer on Twitter.
Oh, that's a fantastic handle.
Oh, I got in 2009.
Okay, that's awesome. All right. So John, once again, thank you so much. And, everyone, I'd super recommend checking out the podcast. It's fantastic. Also, 25-minute chugs generally, which is great for an easy morning walk or anything you happen to do. Yeah. But for everybody else, I will see you guys next week at Tuesday, 8 a.m. Eastern on the Law Firm Growth Podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Law Firm Growth Podcast. For show notes, free resources, and more, head on over to casefuel.com/podcast. Looking forward to catching up on the next episode.